Hello, and welcome to another Cloud Podcast, a podcast designed to bring you stories from the smartest minds in IT, operations, and business, and learn how they're using cloud technology to improve business and the customer experience. All right. Well, welcome to another Cloud Podcast. We're excited today. We have AJ Triano. He is with Syneos Health Communications and is the EVP Customer Experience Practice Guru over there. AJ, welcome to the program. Good having you on.
Hey guys, good to see you.
Absolutely. Artie, good to see you, brother. Always.
Pleasure as always. Thanks for having me on as the co-host today. Alex, we've recorded a couple of these today, so we're gonna have a lot of back-to-back episodes, but looking forward to this conversation because we've got AJ on, and AJ's got an extensive background, not only in the customer experience world, but also he's on some advisory boards as well too. So AJ, I'll turn it over to you. The first question is just, give us a little background of where you've been and where you are today, and then what you guys are doing today in your current role, and we'll go from there.
All right, sounds good. Well, my background has always been in communications and healthcare and digital interaction and development. So I'm kind of one of those geeks that likes to look at all things and how they come together. The world of communications and healthcare is about 10 years behind packaged goods. So a lot of the things that we might describe as innovative, the rest of the world sits around and scratches in conferences and is like, really, you're just doing that? We've been doing that for 10 years. Until COVID. COVID kind of changed a lot, some catch-up work there. But my work has been in the healthcare communications world, always in the space of trying to help a brand who's bringing some sort of medical intervention to market, whether it's a molecule, like a pharmaceutical product, or a med device, something that could be worn or implanted, helping that to be commercialized in the market space. So, all those annoying commercials that everybody sees where it's like you get the benefit and you've got I call it the Pharma Beach ad, where it's like the prerequisite. You've got somebody with rolled up jeans running down some random beach. There's always the golden retriever, and you get 10 seconds of what it is, and then 30 seconds of all of the fair balance, legalese, and all that stuff. That's a part of what we do, but it's not the whole thing. And that's the part that's really interesting for me with customer experience and where healthcare is catching up. So when we talk a little bit more about that in a bit, looking at how pharma sort of finally recognized that just putting an ad out there isn't enough, right? And that customer experience really matters is key. But in my history doing that for years in global agencies, I took a brief break, spent about 2.5-3 years with a small company startup that I helped to get started, who had the great fortune and luck to become a dev shop for Apple in their health division. So I spent a number of years doing clinical trial research with ResearchKit, and help them to launch CareKit and also Evolve HealthKit with big academic institutions, with pharma and industry, as well as hospitals and private practices. So it's a fun way for me to really look at the full end-to-end experience in my career of what does it mean to show up and be someone, not a patient, not a physician, but someone who is engaging in health. And what does that mean for my experience? And all that sort of rolled forward into, the birth of CX as an industry, and healthcare's kind of catching on, and that kind of brings me to now.
Yes, it's funny you mentioned the commercials. Back in my early days of sales, I was working as a pharma rep, working for which is now Merck. We were a smaller company that got acquired by Merck, but absolutely, it's all the legalese and all the things you can and can't do. And we were right around the time where you couldn't give out those little tjotchkes, like pens and stuff. They said that's going to influence the doctor too much, So
a pen,
really, the lobbyist,
I guarantee you,
it doesn't count towards lobbyists, but
a branded ink pen is definitely going to influence somebody who's writing a product for sure.
Yeah, they have to do something sometimes. But it's interesting you bring up CX and how the healthcare industry is behind, and there's several industries I'd say that are behind in CX, so they're not the only one. But what would you say the current state is of where CX is and where it needs to catch up to with maybe some of the more progressive companies that are in digital space or in retail that are just
That's a good question. And I think to answer it, I actually have to point out something that gets conflated a lot, that customer experience and CX is not MarTech and omnichannel. They're related, but they're not the same thing. And I think healthcare, if I go in reverse order, healthcare has been paying, our clients have been paying for MarTech stacks for 10, 15 years. And it's only been in the last 2 years where they've actually started to use 90% of, going beyond a 10% use of what that MarTech stack could do. All stuff that Nike and any other, big, Starbucks, these are the companies, Amazon, they do a great job of leveraging that infrastructure to create an omni-channel experience. Healthcare has paid for it, hasn't really used it. And it has a lot to do with concerns over privacy concerns with HIPAA and being gun shy, when there really isn't a risk if you do it correctly for a HIPAA standpoint, but there is a privacy risk, And it also has a lot to do with regulatory, being really uncomfortable with approving content. Because in our world, as you know, Alex, like everything's highly regulated. I can't just put out a bunch of content. It has to go through regulatory board and approved. And trying to get them through the world of responsive web design and mobile design, where you can't see the whole thing. And then now in the world of MarTech, where you're dealing with dynamic content. What do you mean you're approving content, but it may or may not show? And well, how will I know when it will show? And can I approve that? Like, those are some really tough conversations for people who are responsible for compliance to tackle, but they're doing it and it's good. So the reason I started with MarTech is because that 10-year history of trying to catch up, COVID has caused our clients to, in maybe a silver lining, rush towards MarTech as a solution. And that's great. I think that's a wonderful outcome of positive results we could find in this whole thing. Unfortunately, though, the rush has been more towards what I would call the mechanics. It's hey, I've got this content already. I want to modularize it, which to a lot of them just means chunking it up. And then I'm going to shove it into omni-channel and get it out into different channels. And then I want to know what's the data flow and like, how's it, and thinking it's omni-channel, and it's well-intentioned. But the thing that's happening is the paternalism that's still being carried over. This idea that as a marketer, I already know my customer. I don't really need to understand who they are, what motivates them, or how that context changes across the journey. And therefore my value as a brand shifts. And that's what brings it to customer experience. Because if you really, the conversations I'm having with clients actually start more with MarTech and efficiency, and then talking about CX, then going in and talking about CX. Because unfortunately, clients still are motivated by their business objectives, which do lag. They're catching up with the do lag packaged goods. And so they're going to look at how do I, what kind of sales do I have? What kind of product movement is happening appropriately? It's their job. But not recognizing that we as human beings bring a retail expectation for customer experience to everything, including healthcare. And when that happens, that Amazon experience and all the awesome trickery and amazing anticipatory experience that's going on there, even when it's really creepy because, you say something and like your phone, Amazon app shows it to you in your feed. We're conditioned for that as a patient or a physician. And then we come to healthcare and then we deal with what we get. And so the part that's catching up that I'm seeing a lot of our clients do is recognize that my opportunity as a brand marketer is to look at how not only do I help you understand my product and its relevance in sort of a one-to-one way for you in your journey as it evolves, but also understand that I might have a bigger role to play in creating a better brand experience that actually could change a health outcome as much as taking the product by going above and beyond with extra services, value adds and content, more than just saying, here's when you take it, here's how you take it, here's how you get a price break on it at the pharmacy, that kind of thing. So we really go backwards a lot right now. It's like we start with an ask of, hey, how do I activate MarTech? Because I have to, the pandemic, insert blank, anything else after that, right? But what we end up saying is that's all great, but we have to actually start with customer experience. To whom are we trying to speak? Well, what is their journey? What is their unmet informational and emotional need? What are their practical barriers? And then really importantly, what is your credible and addressable opportunity? Because you could probably find 17 things you could fix, but in healthcare, people are skeptical of pharma. It doesn't mean they want all 17 of those things fixed from you as a brand. So you got to have to do that extra check of, well, what's relevant, what's addressable as your business strategic imperatives and CSFs, and what's credible, what's going to be credibly received by that customer coming from you. And that's where you prioritize your dollars, and then you prioritize them with empathy. And so that's how we sort of wedge an understanding of CX in, because they're looking at, I need to make my MarTech more efficient and saying.
Yeah. I do some consulting in the healthcare industry a little bit, and specifically around PT, post surgery rehabilitation. And there's one customer that I have, and they've got these intake forms, and the intake forms can be filled out digitally. There's a website, there's a QR code, there's an app you could download and fill it out, or you can go into a doctor's office and then you have physical pieces of paper on a clipboard where it's, after this type of surgery, we recommend PT or physical training. Are you interested? If so, fill out this form, and that intake form then gets faxed to a data warehouse where they then turn it into a data electronically, and then they respond by like snail mail or doing an outbound call. It's like this very antiquated old way that you would think in 2021 there's got to be a faster, better way to do it. I mean, and for the COVID shots, for the vaccines, they're still putting the information on physical cards. It's just barely getting to the digital age where you can then turn that card into a digital QR code on your phone to validate through like a tool called Clear or something like that. Mm-hmm. So what are your thoughts about where the future is with regards to, digital transformation for a lot of these processes in healthcare? Do you think, we know the pandemic accelerated it, the need for it? Do you think we're going to get there in the next couple of years, 5, 6, 10 years, or is it still going to be a long tail and it's going to take a long time because of HIPAA compliance and all these other compliances?
It's a really fun question. You can't talk about that without acknowledging the fact that in that example, we're dealing with government entities in a time of crisis. And, sometimes I try to remind our clients a lot that, the idea of innovation doesn't equate to technology. Innovation translates to something better and unexpected than what I'm experiencing now. And for someone as a customer somewhere, or as a business owner, or as a government official trying to deal with a pandemic, the most innovative and quick way to get to a solution may be a card. Doesn't mean it's a long-term solution, right? But it certainly is the meaningful one today. Now, we saw the problem with fraud, and we saw, there's real concern about the viability of that, in a modern era for sure. But I guess my point is that, we have to be careful to not think about digital transformation and innovation as being the prerequisite. Innovation could be non-digital, and that actually could be the better experience in healthcare, in anything, right? But as far as getting through digital transformation, government entity, trying to figure out how to even stand up a website for anything at a reasonable cost, it's impossible. So the idea of having a clearinghouse of data and having that work correctly, it's a big ask, even though it shouldn't be, it is. That actually is one of the issues behind a lot of the naysayers saying, I don't want my government requiring me to show, a vaccine proof and the beliefs that drive people very passionately behind that. One of the things they cite is, it's data and the government can't get it right. What they can do with it.
Right.
I understand their concern based on history of government standing up something that should be simple and accurate. But that actually hints at one of the other problems, I think, in healthcare transformation that we have to figure out. And that's that we are seeing at least in Western cultures, we're seeing this incredible rise of a not me moment. Don't tell me what to do. Don't tell me what to do with my data. Don't tell me that I've got to get a shot. Don't tell me I have to show it. Don't tell me. And often it's don't tell me, even if what you're telling me is fact, logic, like that's irrespective. And the only reason I bring that up is because to do healthcare transformation and to involve digital, you got to get people comfortable with sharing digital exhaust. You got to get them comfortable with having to be compliant in a digital way. And there are other hurdles besides just typical privacy and do I have a database set up right and is it syncing correctly, right. For that to be useful. There is an ideology now we have to contend with, and it's being spiked in healthcare largely by politics. And unfortunately, that is now a part of the picture. So I think if you'd asked me before COVID, I would have said, well, we'll get there in 5-10 years, because it's a perpetual 5 to 10 years. The start of COVID, I would have said, we'll get there faster. COVID's accelerating. Now with where we are, I'd say, I think we're back to 5 to 10 years because we're now dealing with the ideologues that don't want to play.
Yeah, what's interesting about that, and you brought up a good, a great point about people not trusting, right? And we talk about customer experience, that's all part of it, right? If there's, it's almost like they have to make up for possibly decades of mistrust to get the trust back from people, all because of the customer experience in the past. You always hear about lawsuits and pharmaceutical companies getting sued and paying out huge multi-7-figure, 9-figure payouts. So it's people are like, no, I don't want to trust. And then we've been taught these last 20 years that the security of your information is so important, right? So now it's like, well, I'm going to hand it all over all of a sudden. I can see how that makes the hands get tied for people that are trying to promote good digital transformation, but you're up against this wall of this that's been built over the last few decades.
Yeah, and Facebook is something I have to add to the mix here. Pharma for sure has its history of breeding distrust for good reasons, and it is trying to make up for that. Then there's the role of the marketer and modern tech that plays into it, and then you've got Facebook. And every day there's some new release. Oh, forgive me, Meta. Yes, forgive me, Meta. There's some new release about something that breeds more distrust in big tech. Right. And that is this underpin to all of this conversation around trust. And so that is another factor to contend with. I mentioned the modern marketing thing though. And one of the things that's really important, and I do like the trend towards better privacy laws like CCPA in California, and forgetting the 4 letters for West Virginia's law that goes into effect in 2023. And then of course, GDPR, where it forces you as a marketer to actually get back to the good old fashioned marketing work, the grunt work, where you actually have to show a value proposition and give an information sent, and then ask for somebody to sign up to have permission to have a one-to-one communication with them in these governed regions now. You can't just rely on the cheats of big data and buying lists and list matching and data enrichment to accomplish that same goal anymore. So you have to get back to primary list building. You've got to get back to good old-fashioned marketing work with that value proposition. And that's how we start to build trust, because you have to first get somebody to trust what you have to offer them, because it has to be meaningful and valuable and relevant from you as a brand to them in their moment, not their general state. Like, yeah, I'm a patient with X disease or a physician treating, but more of in this moment from customer experience lens, in this moment, in this context, here's how my brand can be of value and relevant to you, instead of here's my brand, right? The whole platform. That's a miss. That actually breeds distrust. So we can build trust back by getting that old fashioned good work of being relevant and valuable, getting people to sign up. And then once they do, then we can actually build trust by really understanding the behavioral science involved with customer experience management and with marketing. Because and this is one of the great benefits of working at Syneos Health, is we have a whole team. We have behavioral scientists here, and we infuse that in our work. And one of the things I really enjoy, many things I enjoy about being able to do this work here, is that we can really understand the why, not just the who, but the why somebody does what they do. And what I've learned through them is that motivation is an incredibly leaky bucket. We can sign up today for something because we think it's the best thing. And then 3 days later, like, why am I not using it? Why am I not doing it? Why am I not, it's not just like weight loss or things like that. It's other things. Like, we pay a lot of money for things like technology and things like that. And like, it was awesome. And then 3 weeks later, are you using it again? Right. And what changed? Well, what changed was the context. There's this awesome book. I say awesome for the geeks out there, but it's like this big. It's called A Diffusion of Innovation. It's not new. It's been around for a while. A gentleman named Everett Rogers did a lot of work looking at like a cross analysis rather of all the published research at the time of what people do behaviorally, behavioral science behind why people adopt something new. That's the title, Diffusion of Innovation. What he identified amongst many things is there are 5 attributes of something new that help us keep moving. So that leaky bucket. The first is relative advantage. And that's what marketers compete on all the time. So from a customer experience standpoint, of course, my brand messages are going to be all about, why I'm relevant to you or but all it simply says is, compared to what I have been using or haven't used at all, how is this new thing better? And that's where your key messages and your brand marketing and all that stuff, that's your brand strategy. Will get that well under play, right? Then after relative advantage, it's compatibility. I look at how well is this aligned with me? So yeah, I hear you. You might be better. Read that. I got it. I'm interested, in my funnel, my customer experience and marketing funnel. I'm interested. You've got my awareness. I'm interested. And now but are you aligned with me? Do you fit my daily flow of life or work? Are you aligned with my values? And we're seeing a lot of work done around trust and brands around values right now. Edelman produces I forget the exact title, but it's an annual trust barometer, I think, where they look at that. And that's a great way to look at values. And then if it's aligned to my values, then I move on from relative advantage and compatibility to complexity. How easy is it for me to understand it, to use it again?
Yeah.
Amongst others. And this is where we see brands fall down all the time, and why CX is so important. Because I could be, put it back in the world of healthcare, I might be the third product to a market. Maybe I'll pick diabetes, for example. It's a crowded market, a lot of treatments. It's really hard to be better than another product at this point on just like the efficacy or the safety. Oftentimes you see products duking it out over price, and you don't really want to be in a price war. Right. Well, your alternate is an experience, a better experience. Well, I could establish I'm a better relative advantage. I might even establish I'm compatible with somebody, and then I still lose the customer, either on acquisition or on retention, because something's too complex. Either the science behind it and why I need to use it's too complex. The getting started is too complex. I've got to use 3 different doses on 15 different pens, and I have to do it over 90 days before I even see the first result. Humans, we drop out, right?
Yeah.
That complexity is there. And so we, from a CX design standpoint, can look at that moment and say, okay, wait a second. Maybe that's an opportunity in that context at that stage of the journey from a CX lens to recognize I can reframe. Hey, I want to remind you that we are better. This product is better than what you had before. And because now I understand the moment of friction, here are some ways around the friction, right? Or here are some tips and tricks to shortcut it. And pairing that side by side at that moment, sort of in a just-in-time fashion way, is so crucial to keeping that motivation alive, right? And then if they're willing to try it at that point, say, okay, you got me, I'll sign up and I'll try it. The other 2 parts, just to finish Everett Rogers' summary of his work, is that after relative advantage, compatibility, and complexity, it's trial. Okay, well, how many of you want to, either of you want to like pay for something wholesale or take a medication without trying it to see if it works for you? No, you want to try it. So samples in our industry, samples are a big deal for that. But you can't sample everything. I can't sample a surgery. I can't, sample an injection. I can't, But what I can do then is turn to observability. If I can't sample his last stage's observability, I look to everybody else's success. And this is where I give social media a lot of props. And our industry started figuring out from a CX lens how you can activate that peer-to-peer machine better. If I activate somebody's experience and then use it to help other people who are considering it discover that experience, I can't try it, but their use becomes my surrogate trial. And then I turn to observability again, because once I try it, I want to make sure it lived up to the promise. That it matched the brand promise, the marketing messages. Did it match my expectations? Did it match the experience of others like me? And that's a crucial linchpin behavioral science-wise to cement an ongoing commitment to then persist with a brand. But you still have the leaky bucket. And so from a CX lens, you still got to be very vigilant, understanding the friction and figuring out where the dropout's going to happen for motivation, and figuring out how you can reframe it in that context using that sort of worth it calculus that I just walked through.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point. I've heard the phrase, don't go where your customers are. You want to be where your customers want to go. Get ahead of the 8 ball. And that's hard to do on the sales and marketing and product side, but it's even harder to do on the customer experience side. And I know you have experience in this. I know that you have some publication work that you're working on in the future that we'll hear about at some point in time. But talk to us a little bit about customer experience in the more micro experiences. Like, what are your thoughts about how people should interact between customers and agents? Like, how should they listen to what the why, and how do they listen for the why? How do they address the why, as opposed to the what? Like, what's the problem? It's the why are you calling in the first place? So talk to us a little bit about your mindset around what this how this can apply to customer service or customer experience.
Yeah, for sure. So all of this, in my opinion, one of the most crucial skills that anybody in CX can employ, two of them is, one is empathy and the other is active listening. We have to really break the nasty habit, mostly pushed by budgets and timing, to just try to short circuit everything. You can still get scrappy, don't get me wrong, but the idea that you could bypass actually listening to your customer and understanding what their issue is, like, that paternalism's kind of got to stop if you really want to make a difference. But you can still be scrappy in that. We actually have some typing tools that we use. Our behavioral science team, and it's all based on the 9 fundamental principles of behavioral science. That's it's not like we went off and created them, but rather we're adapting them for use and putting them in an actionable way that a marketer can employ to your question. And so we have some typing tools. For an example, there is a mindset, a general mindset. It's promoter, preventer is the construct. It's a dichotomy, but it doesn't. There are continuums of others. But the easiest way to talk about it is a dichotomy. If I were to describe me going to the mall shopping, you would say I am definitely a promoter, because I'm out there doing what I could do. I'm spending, I'm very aspirational. I have no problems. Risk is not in my worry at that point. But then it comes April and I got to talk to my CPA about taxes. I suddenly switch to preventer mode. I'm all about risk reduction, right? Well, that mindset, we are generally in one or the other, or somewhere in between in our lives. And we can slowly migrate back and forth. Or like in that example, we can migrate in a context, like in a heartbeat, right? That's important because I can actually change the content I use. It's the same key messages in my marketing platform are there, but the actual execution of that content, I can nuance. Somebody who I know as a persona is much more of a promoter. They're motivated by what they could do, that aspiration. So hey, I've got a new product. Why don't you? Because you could. How exciting. Join us now. Reach your goal. Like that kind of stuff, that's going to appeal well to them. Right.
Yeah.
But it's the same key message. You're just nuancing how you say it or how you type it. Whereas somebody who is risk reduction focused, who's a preventer, they're motivated by the shoulds. And I want to dot my I's, cross my T's. I want lowest risk possible, right? So they're not going to respond well. And we've seen a lot of brands in their launch campaigns, just out of sheer excitement and default nature of getting minimum viable campaign out to market on budget dollars, be more aspirational. Well, you're going to motivate those aspirational people anyway, because they were going to take action just because they could, and they were already primed for that. You need to be designing that launch for the people who are 18 months in, who are a mix or even all the way over on the preventer side, and helping them understand why they should, not why they could. And so there's a fundamental communication, marketing, messaging mismatch that can happen. So you take that idea and put it in a call center. If you assume that you've got, some fairly decent progressive profiling going on in your MarTech stack to try to understand either somebody who they are because they disclose themselves, or who you think they are, based on lookalike strategies, still new, privacy law compliant. Then you can start to give that call center rep clues, right? You can suggest, content from different scripts, same message, so same pre-approved script of things of how to handle different situations. You can actually give them different ways of saying it based on how it might suggest somebody might be, or who we might know they might be. That's basically what we do in marketing automation from a digital standpoint. Like, hey, we happen to, Alex, I happen to know you're a big promoter out there right now, and you're really aspirationally focused. And so I'm going to give you that message set that is much more and already, I know you're a risk aversion. So I'm going to give you a different set, but I'm still saying the same thing.
Yeah.
It's just how I say it.
I think it's really interesting. And it reminds me a lot of, we've had a couple of guests on, we talk about AI and what's going on in the social media realm, and how it's, in a way, it's tailored the same way, where you can push one message to one group based off their persona, let's call it, and another message to the other group, but it's the same brand, just divvying it up based off of called the persona, right? And
now that's persona and modularized content, and that's right. We're suggesting a step further than that. You still do that.
Yeah.
You still do that work, But then when I've got message set A because this is persona 1 and message set B for persona 2, I can then go further and say, all right, well, in persona 1, is this person more aspirational or more risk reductionist? Is they more preventer promoter? And then I can take that message set A and have 2 different versions.
And then tweak it again.
One that's going to appeal, and it sounds like more work, and clients might on our end might look at it and say, oh, that's more money, or time and money spent. But actually it's not. It's easy to, once you have the understanding of who and the why, you can easily create the content, and it's modularized and very efficient inside the MarTech stack.
And so you mentioned the compliance. So how much is that going to affect, the data laws and whatnot that are coming down, like affect the ability to do that effectively? It's a lot of effects.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Well, we don't know what the effect will be entirely yet. I think everybody had their eye for a hot minute on Google and whether or not they were going to really push this federated approach, this flock model, as the alternate to third-party cookies. Then they punted the ball, right? They moved the goalpost out a year before they sunset third-party cookies. But we know it's still going to happen. Meanwhile, a bazillion companies have spun up with different approaches to do it, all promoting to be scalable and enduring. So that no matter what happens, you still made your bet right with us, kind of thing. We're all trying to figure that out. Nobody really has the magic ball right now. My default stance with our clients is still to go back to the basics and say, none of it matters if you've done the hard work and earned the trust and demonstrated good value proposition and gotten people to opt in first party. So instead of worrying about all that stuff, just go get a first party opt in, because then you have all the permission in the world to do that level of marketing to them.
Yeah.
Yep. I totally agree. Same thing with ecom too. It's if they interact with your brand, maybe they're buying shoes on your site or whatever it is, try to get that opt-in. Text me when my shoes ship, or text me if there's a new style, or whatever that is, or whatever the opt-in is. But if you get it directly from them, it's a lot easier than trying to get it indirectly, and especially in the health and medical industry. I feel like we could talk about this topic forever, so I'm not going to go too far into it, but I love your promoter preventer. I went to a kind of like a cloud security offsite where it's all of these cloud security providers talking about their products and why someone would potentially want to buy their products. Think of this as like the McCaffrey antivirus on steroids. Like it's like virtual CISOs. It's like a huge cloud infrastructure built on or parallel to Amazon and Google and Microsoft. Anyways, they sell their product, and they always say there's 2 ways to sell it. It's the preventer way and the promoter way. It's if you don't do this, you will be cyber attacked and your company is going to be sued. And so it's that fear model, fear-based selling. Or it's the promoter way, which is if you do this, you're going to be even more secure. You've built a fortress around your organization. You've built the castle so that it's next to impenetrable. And it's all about who you are marketing to and who you are selling to and what persona they are and how to pitch that. But I feel like that's the same with customer experience and customer service. In customer experience, we oftentimes don't think that we're selling people on things, but we actually are. We're selling people on staying with a brand or staying loyal to the company or organization. So very interesting stuff. Just I wanted to tell that story, but also get your take on, like, is it good to go one extreme or the other for some of these things? Because like fear-based selling might be okay for some stuff.
Yes, for some people rather than some stuff. It really comes down to the person, and fear-based selling can equally backfire on you. You can take something instead of a fear approach and flip it to a positive approach. One of the things that happens in marketing, if you do your customer experience work as a marketer well, you're looking at where there's a moment of tension, and then you're trying to solve it. But sometimes you actually have to raise awareness of that tension because the customer is not actually clear that that's the tension. Right. Either they haven't crystallized it or they simply haven't recognized it's a need. We're trying to help them recognize the need. But if you don't have a fast solution out of that, once you raise that tension, it backfires. You lose them. It's like, now you pissed them off. Like, oh, great. So now I'm aware and I have language to use to describe this thing I hate. And I have no better solution than I had before you started talking to me about it. And now I associate that with you. Right. So it's the same idea, positive and negatives. You got to be very careful on how you use them in that way. And fear mongering can backfire, but sometimes it is appropriate depending on the situation, because it's what's needed. But you said something I loved just now. You said the idea of continuous selling in CX. One of the things that has come to be a bit of a fascination for me in the last couple of months is how every person in their career comes with a different understanding of CX based on where they've been and how it was discussed. And a number of people I've interacted with in the last 6 months or so have described CX as being something that only matters once you're an acquired customer, not associating with acquisition, but only retention. And then I've got people who describe it the other way, when in reality, it is a nonstop experience you're creating for that brand from beginning until you stop using that brand. And in that process, that idea of leaky bucket, another way to say it is the way you described it already, is you're consistently selling. You're reminding them and reframing them why your brand is relevant and valuable in that moment and helpful, not just pushing it, but being helpful.
Yeah. Man, Artie, you're right. I think we could talk about this for another hour, because it's really interesting. And when you start getting into like the behavioral science stuff and just the, how we all operate, and talking about just the customer, and it's the promoter versus preventer. And I really think that we haven't really dived that deep into that part of it on the podcast. And I'd love to continue, but we are running out of time. We'll have to do this again sometimes, but AJ, thank you so much for joining us and being on this. Really appreciate it.
I appreciate the invite. This was a lot of fun. It'll be fun to do it again.
Yeah, absolutely should. And just a quick plug, I know you're on the advisory board over at UCI for the Customer Experience Center, continuing education. So I just want to give that a plug. Is there anything specific you want to say about that as far as what you guys are doing?
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the things, CX is really becoming an important topic, not just a buzz term, but people are starting to really grasp the importance of it to a brand success. And a lot of people in very senior stages of their careers are now suddenly having to grapple with something feels very novice. And that's a difficult moment for any of us as a professional to take. You have to sort of suck it up and say, okay, I got to go learn this. Yep. If you are interested in learning 101 level CX and beyond, University of California, Irvine has a program, and it's online and in person beyond COVID, where you can self-pace and get a certificate of completion from the program. I'm an advisory board member as a CX professional to that program development and have been through it myself. Equally, if you're interested in learning about the behavioral science stuff in an actionable way for a CX designer or a marketer, you can look up a book called Why We Resist. My block out there is going to get in the way. Here we go.
Why We Resist.
This is the book that Kathleen Starr and Leah Householder, two colleagues of mine, wrote, applying those 9 principles of behavioral science in a non-academic, actionable way. Right. Cool. That's the part that matters.
That's
the key, right? A brand doesn't care that you've got daddy issues. They care about how they solve the brand experience using insights. That's right. So
the ego and all that good stuff. Well, again, I appreciate it. Thank you for coming on. And absolutely, we'll post that on the websites about the UCI or University of California, Irvine, and the book. I think is a great book as well. So, Artie, thanks for joining us, buddy. Thanks for co-hosting this with us, and we'll talk to you guys all later.
Alex, pleasure as always. AJ, thank you so much for all your insight, and I'm hoping we do another episode of this at some point in time. We could dig a little bit deeper into behavioral science and more customer experience talk. So thanks again for joining, and for everyone who's viewing, thanks for watching another episode of Another Cloud Podcast.
All right. Well, that wraps up the show for today. Thanks for joining, and don't forget to join us next week as we bring another guest in to talk about the trends around cloud contact center and customer experience. Also, you can find us at adleradvisors.com, LinkedIn, or your favorite podcast platform. We'll see you next week on Another Cloud Podcast.